Good evening and welcome to my Moodle Sharing number 9. This is the one in relation to the 6 examples of viva voce outlines. Now, looking at our first sheet, it is our handwritten sheet. This is the one asking the question of how the cause incorporate folk and pop combinations. I feel that with this focus question, the student could have been a lot more specific in order to assist their focus area and allow them to provide an in-depth exploration. The student could have possibly have said in the actual question in what particular concepts they would pay reference to. As you can see, it's a handwritten one. Now, the student does seem to have quite neat handwriting, but again, in some cases where the actual viva voce summary sheet is handwritten, obviously we're not always going to have some excellent, impeccable handwriting, and it can make it quite hard for examiners to read. Now, she's set it out quite nicely and has put her examples and stylistic features and instrumentation. The only other thing I may say is maybe talking about more than one concept of music per example. As you can see, she's put in there a few examples, one example per example, one concept per example in there, and it kind of just leaves a bit of I'd want to use more evidence, and she may have spoken about that, but and more concepts in relation to this, but that's just what I'm taking from this piece of sheet music. She's also talked about the stylistic features and the folk and pop combinations, but I'd like to see maybe specific examples of characteristics of pop and folk and how that, and spoken about how it's met those genres. Now, for example number 2, this is the one relating to how the music of the Gypsy Kings is influenced by traditional Spanish flamenco music. And I think this is where we start to see the line blurred of handwritten viva voce outlines being a little bit harder to read. As you can see, it could also just because this example is scanned in, but it is a little hard to read. I like how that the student has put the aim of their viva voce first and foremost of what they are trying to prove. And I also like how they have created a table and presented the information in that way, so they kind of have an idea of exactly where to go. I am wondering if they actually used more concepts than just tone, colour and pitch to support their argument. The other thing, they seem to have on one side in the traditional section spoken about the exact aspects from the concepts, while on the other side they have only mentioned the tracks that they are going to play. So I'm wondering if those aspects of the concepts were used for both uses. But again, sometimes different setouts just helps different students remember different things. It really depends on what works from individual to individual. Now, for example 3, this is the one of how the composer creates mood through the use of elements. I do feel this is a very broad topic to be explored in the realm of 10 minutes. The student could have, in the actual question itself, narrowed it down to a few examples and then said exactly how they are proving that the student, how the composer creates mood through the use of what elements. So they could have made it like how the composer creates a certain mood in movies through the use of pitch, and then explored that in depth. As you can see, they have a number of examples, and I quite like how this student has set it out. I should mention this student has typed up their viva voce outline, and it just makes it a lot easier for the examiner to read. I do like how they've used the mind map in theory to talk about, to point out exactly what needs to be discussed in their Viva Voce. But I feel like in the heat of the moment, if you're not really familiar with exactly what's on this sheet, I feel like there's no logical way of reading it like there is when you make lists. And I feel that the student could possibly get flustered and then miss something because there's no solid point where to start and finish talking about it, and you might miss something going around the circles of each thing and therefore not prove your point with the evidence you think you've proved it with. Okay, so then our fourth example, this is the one, the compare and contrast the characteristics of the Sun and Danzon styles with specific reference to duration, pitch, and tone color. First of all, this student has been very specific with their focus question. They've said exactly what they're going to do, compare and contrast the characteristics of the styles with specific reference to the concepts they have stated. So they've told you what they're going to do and how they are going to prove it. Now, they've written their aim straight out from the beginning. So again, the examiner knows exactly what they are trying to prove and then can mark them off as either having proved the point or not proved the point at all. So they've again set their they have set their work out in a table format, which makes it very easy to read. I do believe they could have maybe used some lines to just assist with how easy it is for them to view quickly and organise their ideas. But for the most part, they have what they are going to mention under each concept to do with each song, and they can look at it quickly and refer back to it. Now, number 5, this student, I feel, would have had quite a limited response just by looking at this outline. They haven't been very specific in the title of their Viva Voce. They've simply stated R&B. They haven't even stated like exactly what they're going to explore in R&B, whether it be the history of R&B, how R&B has developed over the years, what is the style characteristics of R&B, explored through the concepts. And really, for their explanation and their outline summary, they've only said they're going to do a brief history of the style. They've listed the concepts and no real examples of how those concepts are shown in those songs. And then they've just stated their examples so that if the student gets lost in the task and doesn't really remember what they're talking about, there's no real way for the examiner to prompt them, and there's no real way the student's going to get, and I feel that the student's going to be prompted by any of these points that are made on the sheet. Now, our last one, which is the music of Australian alternative rock bands, The Living End and Spiderbait. I feel like this question could use a bit more direction this title could use a bit more direction as to what exactly we're exploring in the Australian alternative rock bands. I feel like it's just a bit broad and can lead to the student not exactly providing the in-depth evidence that they think they are. Although in the outline summary, they have said that they want to compare and contrast two Australian groups who compose and perform alternative rock. So maybe if they mentioned that earlier up in the top in their focus title, and say the compare and contrast of The Living End and Spiderbait as two Australian alternative rock bands, that gives a clear direction of where it's going. So they have talked about, I like how they've divided the techniques into the two different bands, and they've used how, and they've put the same techniques under each. So exactly, they're comparing exactly how the two different bands utilize these techniques. But I do believe they could relate them then further back to the concepts of music and relate them back to the syllabus outcomes. Thank you.